They said she couldn't hear it, that sweet, soft murmur like a child whispering a lullaby into a hollow room, but I know she could. I saw it in the way her hands would pause in the middle of slicing apples for her morning oatmeal, in the way her eyes flicked toward the floor when no one else noticed, and especially in the way her shoulders curled just a little tighter when the house fell silent between songs, when even the birds outside the kitchen window seemed to hold their breath. Because the truth is, my heartbeat wasn't mine anymore. It was hers. I had buried it beneath the floorboards, wrapped in taffeta, sealed in a mason jar full of formaldehyde, cradled against the concrete like an offering left in an ancient tomb, not because I wanted to scare her, no, never that, but because I wanted her to feel it, to feel how far I was willing to go just to make sure she never had to be alone in a house full of echoes. I remember the first time she looked at me, really looked, not through me like so many others do when I'm behind the counter stacking meat or scraping fat from the grinder tray at closing hour, but at me, like I was worth reading, worth deciphering, worth unraveling like a mystery novel left half open beside a steaming cup of tea. Her name was Evelyn. Though to me she always sounded more like music than a name, like a hymn sung backward in candlelight or a funeral prayer hummed under the breath of someone who's trying not to grieve yet. She worked at the flower shop across the street. She always wore black. It wasn't until the third time she smiled at me that I realized I had already started collecting things in her name. Cigarette butts from the sidewalk where she waited for her rideshare, the torn grocery list she dropped on the curb, the ribbon from her hair tangled in the brambles of the fence I passed by after closing. But all of it, it wasn't enough. She never heard me. Not until the first gift. You have to understand, it wasn't a choice. It was necessity. She needed someone to cleanse her life of static and rot and human parasites. She needed someone to cut out the noise. So I found her old boyfriend. The one who still texted her late at night. The one who called her baby and sent pictures of himself shirtless in bathrooms that stank of mildew and sour beer. I followed him for 6 days. Watched him take the same route to the gym, the same bar after work. Watched him press his body against other women in the shadows behind neon lights. And when he staggered home with his key turned the wrong way and his mouth muttering insults to ghosts, I stepped from the dark like a promise kept and buried the cleaver in his stomach so fast he never even screamed. He just made a sound. Like a wet sock hitting tile. And then he was down. I didn't stop there. Because Evelyn deserved more than just a death. She deserved art. So I opened him up. Ripped the ribs apart like cage doors. And took his heart, still twitching, still refusing to die. Wrapped it in velvet, sealed it in glass, and buried it under her floor. She moved differently the next morning. Walked with less hesitation. Hummed. She felt safer. I know she did. I had removed the infection. But she still hadn't smiled just for me. So I kept going. One by one. Each man who called her bitch. Each customer who stared too long at her chest. Each girl who laughed at her online. I took something from each. A tooth. A finger. A voice box. I built a shrine beneath her home that only she could feel, a symphony of heartbeat and devotion. She'll hear it soon. She'll know it was always me. And when she says my name, I'll let her open the floor and see how much I truly loved her. You can't imagine the sound a human windpipe makes when it collapses under pressure, not really. Movies make it seem like a snap, a crisp little crunch like a dry twig between boots, but it's softer than that, wetter too, like pressing into rotted fruit and finding something still squirming inside, something that resists at first but then yields, and when it does, it releases a sigh that doesn't belong to the living or the dead, but to something in between, something that might once have been a scream but now just wants to be held, to be noticed, to be loved. That's what it sounded like when I silenced the girl from the flower shop. No, not Evelyn, never her. I'm talking about the other one, the one with the laugh like broken glass in a blender, the one who always found a way to slither near Evelyn's counter, fingers trailing too close to her elbow, breath hot on her cheek as she complimented her smoky perfume like she wasn't the one who bought it for her last Christmas. I heard her once, behind the shop, puffing a cigarette and talking to someone on the phone. She's lonely. Sweet, but pathetic. I could have her wrapped around my little finger if I wanted. You see? That's the disease. That condescension. That arrogant curl of the lip when they speak about people like her, people with sadness in their bones and soft hands and poetry in the way they choose flowers. Evelyn didn't need friends like that. She needed silence. Stillness. Safety. So I followed the girl, whose name I later found out was Mallory. She had this smug little townhouse with a neon cactus in the window and a record player that only played indie bands that sang like dying birds. I waited until she was alone. Made sure her cat was out. Slid through the back door when she took the trash out and left the latch undone. She didn't even know I was behind her until she turned to close the door and met the needlepoint edge of my ice pick slipping into the skin beneath her jaw, right at the point where the tongue meets the neck, sliding in like it belonged there, like it had always been meant to part her like a curtain and let the red lullaby pour out slow, syrup thick, gurgling like a lover whispering in reverse. She didn't scream. She couldn't. She just fell. Hands flapping like butchered wings, face blooming wide with disbelief, and I caught her. I held her. I let her twitch and writhe and dig her nails into my arms as her breath became blood and her stare became glass. I kissed her forehead before I left. Because I'm not a monster. I'm a gardener. And every weed I pull makes Evelyn's world bloom a little brighter. I cut off Mallory's tongue and left it in a jar of honey, sealed in wax, placed at the base of Evelyn's bed while she slept upstairs like a princess in a tower guarded not by dragons, but by me, her sentinel, her blade in the night. She never saw the jar. But she slept better that week. She smiled more. She laughed with the old women who came in for lilacs. She even sang once when she thought no one was listening. My heart throbbed so loud I thought it might punch through my chest and burst across the sidewalk like a wet firework. But still, she hadn't said my name. She hadn't looked into my eyes and known. So I gave her another gift. This time, I wanted to make sure she noticed. I waited for her birthday. And I made her a bouquet. Not of roses. Not of daisies. But of flesh. I carved thin strips from the thighs of a man who had once cornered her behind the shop and tried to sell her pills, a twitchy freak with scabs on his lips and teeth like yellowed corn. I found him under the overpass, already half dead with rot and hunger, and I took him into my car, offered him warmth, and then strapped him down in my basement until his screams became horse prayers and his prayers became gibberish, and then, only then, did I begin to cut. I boiled his skin in fragrant oils. Pressed the layers into petal shapes. Stitched them around florist wire. Painted the tips red with his own congealed blood. When I was finished, the bouquet looked like orchids. Beautiful. Lush. Wet with something too human to be dew. I wrapped it in black silk and left it at her doorstep. She brought it inside. She stared at it for a long time. She didn't smile. But she cried. That was enough for me. Because it meant she felt something. And next time, I'll make her feel everything. She didn't throw them away. That's how I knew she was beginning to understand, beginning to see, to feel, to truly smell what I'd done for her, even if she couldn't yet put the pieces together the way I had sliced and arranged them, the way I had composed every offering with the precision of a composer writing his final, fatal symphony. But the flowers, those red-laced, fleshy blossoms I carved from trembling thighs and swollen calves, they remained in her kitchen window for days, darkening in color, wilting with a kind of human gravity, a rot that wasn't decay so much as it was memory, and still she didn't throw them away. She looked at them every morning while stirring her coffee. I know. I watched her from the crawlspace. That's not where I live, please don't insult me. I have an apartment. I pay rent. I am a man of order. But when the moon bleeds through the sky like something slit at the throat and Evelyn walks barefoot to her kitchen, humming lullabies she must have learned as a child in some house that forgot how to protect her, I crawl beneath her floorboards, the same boards under which the jar of that first heart still ticks quietly like a metronome counting down to our forever, and I listen. I listen to her breathe. To her shuffle the bouquet. To the sniff she makes when she catches a whiff of the copper beneath the perfumed oils. She knows they're not flowers. But she keeps them anyway. And that, oh, that makes my hands shake. Because the distance between horror and acceptance is only a single heartbeat long. And I can feel her crossing it. But not fast enough. She spoke to someone new yesterday. I watched from my usual place across the street, a pair of garden shears in my apron and a half-bled roast sitting under the meat lamp behind me, pretending to be interested in an old man's complaint about chicken thighs, while she laughed, at something the tall, clean-shaven man in the gray coat said. He had no flowers in his hands. No soul in his eyes. Just perfect teeth and a voice that probably dripped charm like poison disguised as syrup. I memorized his face. I followed him home. His name is Miles. He lives alone in a second-story condo. He owns a fish tank with one single fish in it. Who the fuck owns one fish? He's a therapist, which I find unbearably ironic. Because tonight, I'm going to make sure he can't talk anymore. Not to her. Not to anyone. I waited until he fell asleep. He left his window cracked open, the screen long forgotten. Arrogant men never believe their prey. I slid in without a sound. He had jazz playing. Some shit about saxophones and rain. I turned it off. He woke up when the first cut reached tendon. He screamed, but I had already shoved his own toothbrush between his teeth, wrapped with duct tape to keep it in place. I wanted him to watch. Not as revenge, oh no, this wasn't about him, but as a lesson to Evelyn, a symbol she would come to understand once the time was right, once she opened her eyes and saw that every man who smiled at her too long was another parasite trying to steal her joy. I flayed his arms from the elbow down. I cut off each of his fingers. I peeled the skin from his chest in long, ribboned curls. And when his eyes began to fade, I kissed his forehead and said, "She's mine." Then I carved it into his stomach, "She's mine," deep enough to bleed but shallow enough to stay legible after rigor. His torso looked like a love letter. I took his teeth. All of them. Cleaned them in bleach. Tied them together with piano wire. Hung them from Evelyn's rearview mirror like dream catchers. She drove the next day without removing them. She stared at them at a red light. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She touched them. Touched them. She's starting to remember me. I know it. She hasn't seen me yet, not truly, but she feels me. The space between her ribs is warming. The bloom is opening. And soon she'll realize that everything I've done, every scream and whisper and puddle of thick arterial love, was for her. When she smiles, just once, while saying my name. Then, and only then, I will let her see what I've made. I'll take her below. I'll show her the jars. The bones. The blooming shrine. She'll hear the heartbeat I've saved for her. And then maybe, just maybe, she'll love me back. She noticed the heartbeat. I think. No, I know. She paused on the stairs yesterday, just above where the second landing sags a little, where the floor creaks not because of age but because of the pressure from below, from the cavity I've hollowed beneath her home like a root system of my own, branching deeper every time I bring her another gift, another moment of silence carved from a throat that once spoke too much, another scream frozen in the dark that no one but me will ever hear. She paused. She pressed her foot down. She tilted her head. She heard it. Not the pounding of her own blood. Not the hum of the refrigerator. No, she heard my work. She heard the jar. The jar with the first heart. The one still pulsing in brine, still echoing with the rhythm of my devotion, a muscle that won't stop beating because I refuse to let it die. Because it's hers, even if she doesn't know it yet. Let me show you what I've made for her. Beneath the house. Access through a seam in the stone under the crawlspace, past the ductwork and the mouse skeletons and the fetid coils of damp insulation, I have built something better than any cathedral, any temple, any chapel formed by hand or prayer or penitence. I have made a shrine, and I have filled it with memory. There is the hairbrush with Mallory's curls still twisted into its teeth. There is the belt from Miles, blood-stained, looped through the jaws of a mounted mannequin whose eyes are sewn shut and whose lips are stretched open with fishing line to simulate the scream he never got to finish. There is the pile of fingers, polished, labeled with dates, placed in a child's jewelry box velvet in pink. And in the center, like an altar, the jars. So many jars. Each with a piece of my devotion. Each with a part of the ones who dared touch her. Tongues. Teeth. Eyeballs. Lips. One with a single earlobe, because the man who wore it said she looked lonely one morning and had the audacity to place his hand on her back when she coughed. She smiled politely, but I saw the flinch. I saw her skin recoil like it knew he wasn't me. So I found him. And I took what he used to listen to the world. So now he hears nothing, and she breathes without pressure. I've even started writing her name in blood. Over and over again. Some on the walls. Some on the ceiling. Some on my skin. Evelyn. 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 Every letter cut into me like a holy tattoo, the knife trembling just enough to let me feel her. When I bleed, it's for her. When I hurt, it's to remind myself that she's the only thing keeping me human. Without her, I would be all meat and gristle, a puppet with no string. But she's drifting again. I can see it in the way she's begun locking her front door twice instead of once. I can hear it in the way she checks her car windows every morning, sometimes looking at the mirror charm, the teeth, and touching it with a finger that no longer trembles, just presses, then pulls away like something burned. She's afraid. Not of the world. Of me. She doesn't know it's me, not yet, not entirely, but something in her subconscious, something buried like my shrine beneath the surface of her waking mind, has begun to stir. A name. A feeling. A memory from before all this started. From before the first time I saw her, all those years ago, before the flower shop, before she grew into the sadness that now shapes her hips and hangs beneath her eyes like shadowed pearls. I don't think she remembers the school. The incident. The river. But I do. And I think, somewhere inside her, the echo still hums. She saw me once, drowning. She reached out. She almost saved me. She wasn't strong enough. But I never blamed her. Because she cried when they pulled my body out. And when I came back, when I healed, when I stitched myself together in places where no one looked too closely, I decided she would never cry like that again. Not for anyone else. So if she's afraid now, that's fine. Fear is a seed. And seeds, when fed properly, grow into love. I just have to make the next gift unforgettable. I've already chosen the next one. A man named Ben. He works with her brother. Came into the flower shop yesterday with a box of chocolates and a stupid grin. I watched him touch her shoulder. And she smiled. She fucking smiled. But I've got his address. And I've already started sharpening the cleaver. This won't be like the others. No more quick slices. No more clinical extractions. Ben gets the full performance. Ben gets the scream Evelyn couldn't give me that day by the river. Ben gets to feel everything. And when I'm done, when he's nothing but a bundle of nerves and hair and apology, I'll take the organ that beats hardest, and I'll place it in a velvet box, wrapped in a ribbon of his own intestine. I'll leave it on her pillow. And maybe then, maybe finally, She'll remember who I am. Who I've always been. I watched him first. Because I wanted to understand him. Benjamin Keene. 32 years old. Grew up in Maryland. Moved here in 2019 after a breakup that left him sensitive to rejection and in search of a fresh start. He thinks of himself as charming. He volunteers on weekends. He likes jazz and dark chocolate. He thinks Evelyn is complicated. That's what he told her brother during a lunch break I watched from a Russ Street rooftop, my breath fogging the scope, my hands itching. He said she needed someone patient. Gentle. Consistent. But what he really meant was that he saw her sadness as a wound he could fuck. And that's what sealed his fate. I followed him home the night after he visited the flower shop with that stupid cardboard box and his gently used grin. I watched him turn his key twice in the lock, step over his mail, kick off his shoes, and collapse on a leather couch that smelled like 100 lonely nights and 1,000 greasy dinners. He put on some Chet Baker. He poured whiskey over ice and texted her a meme he thought was clever, something about orchids and intimacy. She didn't reply. I did. From an untraceable number, she's not yours. Then I cut the power. He stumbled in the dark, called out once, hello. His voice trembling at the end like a question already answered. I could smell the fear bloom in him like cheap cologne, sharp, acidic, full of vinegar and sweat and chemical panic. He reached for a flashlight in a drawer I had already emptied, and that's when I stepped from the shadow behind the coat rack, wrapped the garrote of piano wire around his neck, and whispered, let's talk about patience. His scream was wet and sudden. I didn't kill him quickly. I made it art. I tied him to a dining chair using his own bedsheets, twisted tight around his wrists until the veins bulged like worms and the tips of his fingers began to purple. I removed his shoes, then his socks, then used a box cutter to peel the pads of his feet like fruit skins. He shrieked, but the house was old, and the neighbors were too far, and the music still played from his dying phone in that buttery, indifferent trumpet tone. He begged. They all do. But this time, I didn't care to listen. This wasn't about him. This was about her. So I cut pieces of him shaped like love. I sliced a heart into his chest. Crudely, messily, the skin puckering like boiled meat, and peeled it open so I could dig in and feel the beat of his pathetic devotion. I took one of his eyes, just one, because that's how he looked at her, always partial, always selfish. I removed a molar, then a fingernail, then one of the small bones in his left foot because he didn't deserve to walk in her world. I whispered her name to him every time I took something. Evelyn. 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 He tried to speak. So I removed his tongue and placed it in a jar labeled liar. And still, his heart beat. I took that last. With trembling hands and a whisper of ceremony, I reached in with gloved fingers slick with his innards and carved it out, whole, beautiful, red as roses and warm with the last of his foolish love. I pressed it to my cheek. I kissed it. Then I held it to my chest and said, this is how you should have felt, you useless bastard. When I left the house, I took 3 things. His phone. His heart. A single photograph of Evelyn from his refrigerator, one he printed and stuck with a magnet shaped like a star. I burned the rest. The house. The body. The excuses. I doused it in lighter fluid and watched the flames consume the lies he told himself. I made sure there was nothing left but ash and charred metal and bones so black it would take weeks for anyone to identify. And while the fire raged, I sent her a final gift. I left it in her bedroom. I watched from the attic vent as she came home, weary, her shoulders sagging, her eyes dark, her soul so fragile I could feel it stretch with every step she took toward that room. She opened the door. She saw the box. She froze. It was wrapped in red velvet. There was a ribbon made from flesh, thin, pale, translucent. His. The card read, "Only the best pieces for you." She didn't scream. She just sat down. Her hands shaking, her mouth working to form a question that never made it past her lips. She opened the box. She saw the heart. And she listened. She didn't call the police. She didn't throw it away. She just sat there, staring. Listening. Because, you see, it still beat. I made sure of that. And now, I think she knows. Not everything. Not yet. But enough. Enough to start remembering the river. Enough to start dreaming about the boy she tried to save. The boy who died. The boy who came back. The boy who loved her so much, he tore the world open just to be close again. I think she's hearing my heartbeat now. And soon. She'll answer it. She came to me at midnight. Hair damp from rain, shoulders hunched beneath a coat too thin for the cold, lips trembling not from the wind, but from the weight of something buried, recently unearthed. Her hands, those delicate fingers I once watched twist the stem of a violet until it snapped, were wrapped in gauze, blotched with dried blood. Her shoes left red footprints across my floor, the storm outside only half responsible for the stains. She didn't knock. She didn't need to. She knew I'd be waiting. She always knew. The heart I gave her still beat in its velvet cradle. She'd kept it warm. Fed it. Whispered to it when no one else was listening. She'd named it Benji. And now she held it like a talisman, like a prayer, like something holy, something alive and meant only for her. I remember, she said. Her voice was ice over fire. I remember the river. The fall. Your eyes. The way the water filled your lungs. I smiled. I nodded. I waited. I remember thinking you died. I stepped closer, heart pounding. I did, I whispered. And then I didn't. I showed her the room. The walls were painted with the names of every man who had ever touched her and didn't bleed for it. Every boy who kissed her in the dark and never asked her what her nightmares were. Every smiling bastard who called her beautiful and never once meant sacred. Their names were written in blood. Their teeth hung from strings like rosaries. Their bones made altars beneath her photograph. She didn't flinch. Not once. She stepped into the room like a queen into a cathedral. And I, the loyal thing I've always been, dropped to my knees. Is this what you want? I asked. To give her everything. To tear the last of myself apart. To place it at her feet and let her decide if I was monster or martyr. She didn't speak. Instead, she reached down. Touched my face. And smiled. Not cruel. Not kind. Just, knowing. And that was all I needed. I took the blade, the one I made from the rib of her first boyfriend, filed to a perfect crescent, and plunged it into my chest, just beneath the sternum. Pain screamed through me like a symphony of razors, but I didn't cry out. No. I grinned. Because I was giving again. Because love doesn't ask. Love bleeds. She knelt beside me. Held me as I cut deeper. I reached in. Fingers trembling. And with one last breath, I pulled it free. My heart. Still warm. Still red. Still hers. And as my vision blurred, I watched her place it beside the other. Two hearts. Side by side. Beating. Just for her. She closed the box. Stood up. And whispered, "Now you'll never leave me again." Final warning: if someone gives you their heart, make sure it's not still beating. And if a stranger ever sends you a velvet box with a smile carved from sinew and a note that says, "I did this for you," don't open it. Because love like this doesn't stop. It rots. It devours. And it waits, in the dark, in the walls, in the reflection behind your mirror, for the next heartbeat to mimic. You can block the number. Change your locks. Move to another city. But if they loved you once, they'll find you. And when they do, they'll bring someone else's face stitched into a bouquet, just for you.